Welcome. Today, as always, every quarter, we're going to be talking about an update on the changing nature of work. We started calling this when work from home wasn't the big issue anymore. It's still an issue, but wait till you see this quarter. Things continue to change, and I want to make sure you're kept updated. So first, I'm going to go over the updates, of course. And then I've titled our middle section, or it's actually the last section, because there's only two, employees and employers, because there's a lot of things that have come out in the popular press and in my GLIT, the Google Lit review that I do over the 3 months, keeping track of things that I find that are interesting and important and themes we need to do. So anything about what you should do is more in two categories, and I'm not even going to present it. It'll be along the way. Number one, be aware of the trends and the indicators for you and the kind of work you do and where you want to go next in terms of promotions, fellowships, job hunting, whatever is your next opportunity for a career step. So let's get started. Updates. This is the first time in a few quarters that I haven't started with that monthly progress report I get called Work from Home Research, where I usually go through all of the different, what sectors are working at home, what percent of people that can work at home are working more than a day a week, because long story short, none of those indicators have changed in the last 3 to 4 months. I looked at it really quickly for September and compared it to what the June numbers were, and they haven't shifted at all. There's only one chart from that research that I'm showing today because the rest has not changed. We have solidified, and I'll get there. Just wanted to show you these numbers keep changing, but we're over the big part of the early layoffs in early 2023. But tech sector is still having a lot of people that they're letting go. What's interesting to me also, this from a data viz point of view, there are a lot of companies each month that have let people go, but you can see that some of the bigger ones have bigger numbers by the size of their logo that's incorporated into the bar chart. So it's a little messy, but it follows a lot of the principles of good, effective data visualization. And it's very graphic when we see in January. And we talked about this. The top three, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. Amazing that they jump up really big. Meta has had 2 layoffs, November and May, for example, you can see. Not a lot here, but again, indications that things are still, they seem to be winding down. And as we get towards the end of the year, for those companies, many for-profit companies are on a calendar year calendar. So they, by the end of the year, they want to be dumping everything they can and start new or save things for early January and make gains. Layoffs, they're talking, this was a retrospective tweet that came to me through Hung Lee's Brain Food that he does. He's a talent acquisition specialist on the global scale and has a podcast every week and has a very interesting newsletter. Tech layoffs partly are the e-commerce that came after advertising started to dip in COVID. Not started, it took a huge plummet. And for example, podcasters are now not able to get as much advertising as before, whereas in COVID, podcasting was the primary source of how to get to people. That went through a huge resurgence and upswing in 2020 and 2021. So the short answer, the short summary in these graphs is what they expected to happen and what's happened didn't exactly happen. And what the comment was is basically we're back to a projected baseline. Not a lot here to see, but I wanted you to see that the tech is riding it out, even though what I just showed you with the bar graphs, it's up and down, lots of people laid off. And we're still in a Department of Labor statistic surplus, meaning there are more jobs than there are people going after jobs. But as we've often talked about, that's gross macro statistics, and the jobs don't always line up with the categories, as we know. I did interestingly enough, there were a couple of things that came out that are more global. So I'm happy to be able to present them. There's been a lot of discussion in threads, which I've converted to from Twitter and also on LinkedIn, about immigration and what jobs and where and who's taking it. And we all know this because we, at least in America, in the US of A, America, we're going through always commenting on, oh, we have too many immigrants or we don't have the right kind. And yet we know the visas for certain kinds of short-term or targeted immigrant labor, as well as for study visas and what they call, I don't know what the actual name is, but the genius visas, where they give very educated people who bring skills that we may need in the US to the US. Those are still the same. The short version of what this person, Jonathan Portes, posted is that the numbers are coming from healthcare workers, social care workers, which is true. But I will tell you, if you go down a little bit more, investor, business development, talent are also right up there. Now, these are percentages, not total numbers. And there's a big difference between 3,200 people and 47,000 people, which is why I didn't highlight it. But just so you can see, the UK is granting visas, and these people are taking jobs that traditionally in the UK, just like in the US, at least in healthcare, nursing, for example, and related ancillary professions, were many decades ago. The US had Filipino nurses everywhere. We were going through nursing shortages in the, when did I graduate? Blah, 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 like 70s, 80s. All right. Here's the one chart from our work from home research colleagues. And this continues a discussion we had last time about a 4-day work week and where people could go to think about it. And this is the nuances that people haven't been talking about to date, but I'm glad now we can bring this up and remind us. Is it that you want to compress the work into 4 days, which is 4 days a week for 10 hours each day, or 4 days a week at 8, this isn't the choice up there, at 8 hours a day, where we're acknowledging that people can get as much done in fewer hours in many cases. And I know we've had that discussion, and some of you on here in the past have brought up that you're sometimes able to get your work done much more quickly than the required 40 hours a week in the office. So more to come on that. Didn't find a whole lot of research on that. But here's an interesting chart. It's very busy, but basically it says people who want 4-day work weeks, if they get 4-day work weeks, that to them is worth having because they feel it's equivalent to getting a raise, even without getting a direct pay raise. Now, I won't take the place of Allah, who could interpret this a lot more quickly. It's, as I said, there's a lot of things to look at in here, but basically it goes, do you want a pay cut? How much of a pay cut? Do you want a pay raise? How much of a pay raise? And it's distributed. And so the no pay cut raise is almost 1/3, and that's significant. But there are others, 20%, that want 6 to 10% pay raise. So indicative is what I say about this data. I don't think it's a great quality data because of the way the results are being presented. What else is going on in updates? This Nick Bloom is one of the people in the research group that work from home research, and they are about to publish an article. And so he did an interesting graph that shows where hybrid and remote started coming into the lexicon, hybrid much later, because in the old days, in the before times, we called everything that wasn't in the office we were sitting in remote. For me, it was always, oh, we're in the US and those country offices are remote workers, is basically how it was categorized. Again, not a huge surprise, but what Nick is saying is the way in which the definitions are changing means we need to agree, and this has come up in many of the discussions we've had on the quarterly changing nature of work, because hybrid to one person means 1 day a week in the office, other people it means 2 to 3 days. So hybrid isn't fully integrated yet or agreed on. Same thing with remote. What do we mean by remote? And then this is the article that they're about to publish. Again, the summaries are things we know about. Work from home levels have increased, but what's increased is the increase is permanent, but it's not permanent at the highest level that we saw that. And we know that it's down around the 20% again. And it's highest for people that have more education, more knowledge worker jobs. And obviously those are because you can't serve a restaurant from your home. So the people who have to be in place to do service related tasks, for example, or real estate, hard to show things online. They did during COVID, but when you see a house in person, it looks very different from the pictures put online. All right. This is more of a review of what are employers wanting again, and what are employees wanting still. I'm going to start with something really dramatic. There was research showing that companies lie when they're recruiting people, and they admit to lying. They surveyed over 1,000 managers and business leaders. If indeed there's this many lying about the company or the role, I'm appalled. And I feel like it's how policemen can lie about anything if they've got you for questioning, and they can say, oh yeah, we found your murder weapon, or we found this, and even if it's not true. All right, we won't go there, but we will go then to the next one, which says, of the number who lie to candidates, 75% lie in the interview, 52 in the job posting. And I don't know whether lying is making very rosy, because they use the word lie. They don't say embroider, embellish, whatever. But in the offer letter, they lie. I was horrified with this. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And then you'll notice in yellow, the bottom statistic says 92% say that they have had a candidate they lied to accept a job offer. I'm envisioning in the interview, maybe they talk about culture too positively when they know it's not really as positive. We all expect that. We can't describe that. The interview is the best picture of ourselves, whether we're the employer or the employee. The job posting, that's a written document. Yes, it's not a legal document, but it's your reputation. And you lie in that? Well, that makes me nervous. But the offer letter's equivalent to a contract in many ways. Yes, you can negotiate it, but it's still in writing. It's still a formality from the company. So that shocked me. And then I was happy to see it's actually Katie Couric. It made its way to Threads, but Katie Couric posted about this report that the Harvard Business Review reported on about women in leadership face ageism at every age. And that there is a common stereotype that any woman is either one or the other, too old or too young for advancement. And it was interesting to me when I found this last week, because the week before I had talked to someone I've worked with a couple times over the last 3 years. She now has 6 years of experience. She looks very young, and she's working on a team that's mostly male. And their funder was on a phone call with them, and he routinely sidelines her, and as if she doesn't have a place. But then he said something really crass in this group meeting, and she talked to her boss about it later. But he keeps calling her little girl, and, oh, you don't bother about that. Your boss will take care of that for you. I think we've discussed before the problem with ageism, and that the younger generation feels it in terms of being told you don't have enough experience, which may be true, and that's okay, but not when it's either defined by gender or defined for a certain category of worker when they've proven that they've got the experience. Because we know that the youngest generation working now comes from a lot of experience in high school and college, a lot more assertive ways that they've been able to go out and pursue what they think they want their career to be. And that doesn't get reflected in their first job. This just says that a lot of this happens when women aren't in the room. And in the way that they talk about it, it's always couched in, oh, she has family responsibilities, even though the woman may not be the person who most bonds with the children they have, if they have them. It may not be the woman whose family is sick. It may be the husband who's taking care of his mother, but it's always put back in discussions on the woman. So they talk about how can they fight it. It's a structural issue that we deal with, but I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was important to talk about the fact that it's happening from young to old, affecting our ability to get promotions. They also remind people that when you're hiring, and I would say just generally for your brand, you should always be looking at your imagery, and it shouldn't be younger people that have hip haircuts, whether the beard's in this month or the mustache for men, or whether women wear hats in photos. There's all sorts of trends that can signal generations and age. But think about, let me back up. I remember in both companies I worked in the US offices for, most of the people we had were mostly young researchers that they posed in pictures, until they began to realize that a lot of us in the office were a lot more over 40 than the younger folks. So they talk about also that we have to be careful about not making statements. I don't think I've met anybody, older women who I often work with, in the last 2-4 years, especially with everything, that the emphasis of everything in COVID. I don't know anybody who has said, oh, I can't learn that new software. I found that among the baby boomers, I'm in that generation, many of us, because we were digital pioneers in terms of when electric typewriters moved on to word processors and moved on to actual computers, we all embraced it. Are we good typists? No, I'm a 3-finger typist, if you can believe that. You probably can with my typos. So interesting thinking about it, but we're going to be talking then now about what does that mean for, in another article, where women can get promoted. I thank Dorothy Dalton for this. She identified in the leanin.org, put out a report, and there's something called the broken rung. And the broken rung is the first step from your entry-level job to getting towards a promotion. That first promotion happens much less to women than men. And if you don't make that first jump adequately, it follows you for the rest of your career, both in terms of promotions, but also the salary, which then brings the benefits. So if you don't get promoted adequately at the job or salary level that you were hoping for, that's not just salary. That is how much can you put away, at least in the US, put away in your retirement plan. And we know the younger you are when you start that, the more you're going to end up with the wealth you need to make sure that the next generation's also cared for. You can see here in terms of C-suite leaders, 1 in 4 are women and 1 in 20 are women of color. Abysmal, considering the emphasis that I feel we've been making the last 2 decades to try to reverse that. Now, where and how, I didn't read the whole report, so I'm at fault for not being able to validate statistics I'm showing you. But I think it's an organization that wouldn't publish bad data. It might publish statistics that are not going to hold up, but it's just think about any C-suites you've been in and how many are actually overrun with women rather than having many fewer or only one. And this becomes then a pipeline issue, because if women can't get promoted early and get across that broken rung, there's fewer of them to get promoted as we go up the ladder. And there are fewer available spots anyway as we go up the pyramid. So you can see here, for 100 men, 87 women are promoted, but only 82 of those are potentially women of color. It affects us all along. Similar to saving early because of compounding, money compounding. If we don't get promotions for women done early and break some of the systemic issues we're in, we don't have the talent pipeline to choose from. On to another thing to look at in all of this information we have, and this is about knowledge workers. Hewlett-Packard surveyed over 15,000 employees in 12 countries. And I don't know how they define these. The statistics in the red box are the titles of what they say, what they identified as their key points. And I'm just, I put them in a box so it was easier than reading through things. But they asked people, do you have a healthy relationship with your work? Now, I don't know what the question was or how they gave you opportunities to answer it. I have no idea because it doesn't look like a really easy question. It's one of those things where you can have thousands of definitions without a very long question with a lot of if this and it could be that. The US and India, about 1/5 to 1/4, right? Japan, way, way down. Not sure why, but we know that Japan, at least stereotypically, we've been told in Japan, there's a lot of pressure to show up and perform at work and be there long hours, and people commute a long time and live in tiny apartments in a city to be able to have that kind of job. Then they talked about if you have an unhealthy relationship with work, what do you struggle with? Not surprisingly, over half have a mental health problem and have a physical health problem. That's not a surprise. That comes from stress. And if you're unhealthy, if you have an unhealthy relationship with work, you're stressed for sure. In terms of what they were calling quality of work, especially, again, another question, I'm not sure how they asked what you considered your quality of work, but many of those who said, yes, there's an issue with it, are considering leaving, over 3/4. And others are disengaged or less productive. And they just said 1/3. I put it in quotes because I don't know exactly what that is, which is not surprising. We know that a few months ago, it was called quiet quitting. It wasn't really quitting. It was just people who were just keeping their head down, doing the minimum at their job, or sometimes just doing their job was called quiet quitting. Basically, the reason I titled this whole section employers and employees, we're at two ends of the spectrum, with employers not recognizing the things that are plaguing workers. That's my theme through the research that seems to be coming up. They somehow asked people, would you be willing to take a pay cut to be happier? Or would you be happier if you could do X and Y, but earn less salary? And 83% said yes, they would earn less salary. The people who are ready to take a quote pay cut would also be willing to either or want to look for work in another organization, or they want more flexibility. And this goes along with the people who want remote work, choose when and where they're going to work. So those aren't huge indicators, but again, what we're seeing is what people want, and what knowledge workers especially could do in terms of work environments is not necessarily what employers may be doing. And this is a term, I had heard it called overworking, but it's actually called now overemployment. And I looked at this, I looked at the Reddit and subreddit, which is a big, huge discussion board thing that exists for those that don't know it, which is where people are working remotely or working virtually, and they actually have 2 full-time jobs, and they get paid for 2 full-time salaries. Now, this particular article in Forbes talked about the company, I've covered it up with something. Oh, Canopy. Canopy fired engineers who were working 2 jobs. And I don't know how they discovered this, but it was interesting that these 2 engineers, one of them was making over $130K a year already in his job with Canopy. This went viral because the question came up, are the pressures of inflation causing you to have to take on a second and third job? And this is not new in the US. As we've gone out of the early baby boomer years, when one parent worked and was the income and benefits holder for the family, to mothers, mostly mothers, but the other parent going to work because additional income was needed so that either lifestyle changes, bigger houses, less of a commute, longer commute, whatever they wanted, came into being. Universities began to be more expensive, and more people were going to university and getting degrees than they did in the 50s and early 60s. Overworking is when you're being asked to do too much for the pay at your job. This is my simple definition of it. Overemployment is when people try to do 2 full-time jobs and get paid full-time wages. I don't know how they split their benefits or what they do. I didn't list all the things that you can see that will be the signals to employers that people may be overemployed, meaning they don't show up for meetings or whatever. You can look at the article, but I think it's important to recognize even before the pandemic, I was hearing from people about side hustles. And part of this was many of the people that I talked to in my mentoring practice were interested. They had things that they started in high school and college. They didn't want to give it up when they graduated, excuse me, early public health years when they started out in public health. So they were doing them on the side anyway, and that's continued. So you see here that there are people who say they're seeking more work because of inflation. They either want additional work or they're doing what they're calling short-term gig work, which there's a continuum of extra work, and call it what you will. It's how many hours extra you put into it to make it happen. I was surprised to see that government at a high level, and they didn't say exactly where, is looking at what an employee means. And eventually it could be things that never were considered to be full employees, or could be independent contractors, especially if they weren't hired directly by the company themselves. Think about in the US, or at least in the county I live in, there are no county bus drivers. The bus driving contract and the buses is outsourced. So those are definitely contractors, but there are employees who are hired in a company who would fall under more of a contractor role. This is being considered. There's no definition for it yet. And the only other time I've seen this come up in terms of what's an employee is when a company wants to hire someone to do a contract, and the IRS rule says if the person works for you more than 6 months of the year and works basically full-time as a full-time job, they're an employee, not a contractor. So this will be interesting if they start defining what it means to be an employee in terms of it would be US tax laws as well as worker protection laws like OSHA. So I put a lot out here in terms of what I want you to see about the way that things are shifting permanently, but also the kinds of, we're still not seeing a lot of matching up with companies. Something came in literally early this morning that was describing employers wanting to hold tight on being in the office 4 days a week and blah. I didn't have time to edit this PowerPoint to add it in. That's still there in the background, in the foreground for some of you. But I'm going to stop here, and I'll show you the reference list and you'll get the list of links. But Ron, I would love to hear your comments on this. You're on mute. I know you are.
I was looking at, for me, when I look at things, some of the indicators that you didn't illustrate, it's layoffs and all the rest of it. Another indicator that something's happening is the vacancy rate in commercial buildings.
Yes.
And I had a quick look at the Canadian stats just to see, and it's up to 20%, almost 20%, 18 and 19%, and it's continuing to grow in spite of what we think we're hearing about hybrid work and the like. And of course, hybrid work reduces the requirement for employers to have space. It does change the way the office is laid out and so on. And and having a private office starts to become an impossibility, and you have shared working spaces and so on and so forth. So that's one element. And the other side of that is construction is down. In other words, commercial construction is way down in Canada and has been falling since COVID. So this is a reflection of the kinds of things we've been talking about. Stephanie's got her hand up here. Do you want to go ahead, Stephanie, put something up?
I was a little surprised that the numbers had not changed, and I wanted y'all's opinion on whether or not maybe the numbers haven't caught up, because I know in Atlanta, at least, well, two things are happening. The government, they're forcing the highest level of managers to come back into the office 2 days a week, beginning October the 1st. And then we keep hearing about companies that are offering incentives for their employees to come back, free lunch and haircuts and all these other perks that I would never get with my job, but that's okay. So I wonder what your thoughts were. And then the traffic here has definitely increased Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And we thought that it may be from more people being forced to go back into the office, and just wondered your thoughts. Over.
Let
Yeah,
me, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, just the impression I have from a Canadian perspective is that, yeah, that what you're saying is that there is more happening. They're forcing more people back. The Canadian government, which was a real advocate for work from home, for example, has now applied some of these rules. And they were resisting it, and now they're doing exactly the kind of things that you're talking about, is forcing certainly senior people to go in, and all the arguments we've heard before as to why that's essential. But the net result is still vacancies. In other words, there's a lot of commercial space that isn't being used because of this. And so that's creating an interesting challenge. I'm hoping that what that means is that the construction that would normally have gone into commercial can go into housing, because there's a real housing crisis that we're experiencing. Some other things just before we go in. Oh, sorry. So I'll let you respond to that.
The article that came, or the summary that came this morning, contrasted some approaches. If I recall, a couple big companies are mandating 2 to 3 days a week. And then they were contrasting it with J.P. Smucker. For those who have no idea who that is, Smucker produces jams, primarily jams and jellies, but has expanded into other foods. And they are looking at 2 core weeks every 6 months at your choice to be in the office, which is very flexible. And the point of the whole article is managers still don't trust that people are as productive or more productive at home. And this isn't very politically correct of me to say, but I'm at the advanced stage I'm at, so I'm going to take my senior liberty. These managers are too old, and they're thinking that they know better than anybody else. I had people who, in the middle of snowstorms, some of our senior people were making not healthy people come into the office in snowstorms because their job was supposed to be in the office, as opposed to don't put yourself at risk. So I think, Stephanie, it's not all old managers, but there is this there's the pervasive myth that innovation only happens when you're around people. I heard someone say this. He's a big professor, Scott Galloway, at one of the New York universities. He's a futurist. And I listened to his stuff on AI, and he's talking about there's nothing like an in-person meeting. And I get so tired of hearing that from people on LinkedIn. How many of you today on this call with me or Ron have met us in person? Not at all. And yet I know a lot about you all. We've worked effectively together. Yes. Do I know your family by meeting them? No, but I know a lot about them. It's not like you don't get that. Ron and I talk all the time about, thank goodness we have this virtual relationship. We've been able to be co-mentors for each other. We've collaborated. We've invented some things. I think that it is this, dare I say, male-oriented idea that they know what's best and what's in charge. And I'm willing to be taken to the woodshed. For those who didn't grow up in the US, that's where you went and got spanked when you were not good in the old days. I'm willing to have my hand spanked. I don't think it's everybody, but I think that's what we're hearing. And I don't think it's healthy, for sure. Ron, I know you have comments too, and then
Yeah.
open it up.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting when you brought out the fact that people are carrying on 2 jobs at high pay, perhaps that's the fear, is that they're only working for me 3 days a week, and they're working for somebody else 3 days a week, and they're hauling in $260,000 between the 2 jobs or something. That could be an argument why people might have this fear, but it is pretty irrational when you think about it. I was going to just make one more comment about the idea of lying. I could tell you were appalled it's astounding to hear those numbers, and especially with job offers. And I guess how they get away with it is it's in the employment contract per se, and they'll always say you cannot rely on any other writing or what, because there's going to be some fine print somewhere. You cannot rely on verbal or other written correspondence. The only thing that actually matters is the contract. And so that is how they probably are getting away with it. But I'm surprised somebody hasn't been taken to the woodshed over that. Anyway, I had some other thoughts, but we're running a little long. And I saw someone had a hand up there earlier. I think it was Ala.
Oh, hi. No, I was just clapping for you and Sue, but
Okay.
it's just, I'm just like the audacity of these companies thinking that what they pay for people can support their families. And the audacity that someone think that I need to be under you even when I'm at home. If I'm still making, and I think it all goes back to since we started this pandemic, we talked about it. Measurement of outcomes.
Yeah.
What are you using to measure outcomes? And the fact that they do not want to do their jobs as managers to say, this is what we're measuring. These people are meeting their deadlines. They are doing the same jobs. These are our clear outcomes. If you meet it, we don't care. The fact that they think it's only when you're around me, give me a sensation that I am producing as an individual. I think it just project what they need to do, right? Project an insecurity of what am I supposed to do? Because it's a traditional idea. I need to manage people around, but now I don't have any people around. So what I'm going to do? You are managing people from a distance. You are conducting meeting where you're following up with people. People are meeting their deadline. If someone wants to get 2-3 jobs, why are you upset? How is it's not hurting you? It's not hurting you. And I think this is where I'm just like capitalism, process with selfishness, process with God knows what. But yeah, people do need money. It's not
Yeah,
enough for people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you pointed out something really important. And it says, what are they counting? Clearly, it's eyeballs sitting at cubicles, and that's what they're counting. And the outcome that you talk about, realistic, business-worthy outcome, which we emphasize all the time, that's not what they're counting. And so that's scary when you think about it the way you put it.
I just want to wind this up with a comment. I decided not to put this in, but yesterday mornings, I still get the newspaper. And on Sundays, there's always a great business section, and there's interesting articles, some of which I bring to you all. One was by the finance person, Michelle Singletary. She's great. And she was talking about people facing the government shutdown and what it means, not just for federal workers, but for federal worker contractors of those workers. And she said, and this happened the last time or the time before, it was long. It went into January, February, and people were wanting to take part-time jobs. And most federal employees are not allowed to take any job, whether it conflicts with your work or not, even though you're not on work, you're not being paid. The only thing they carry apparently is your health benefits. So she had a whole lot of ideas for people who wanted extra work, but it is one of those situations where the worker is always the person getting squeezed. That will show up in the US if we make it past the 30th with nothing solved about our budget. And it makes it very difficult for us to, as a country, to have people's trust that the government and employers are active partners together, when actually it seems like many companies, even if they're not for profit, if they're for profit, even not for profits tend to squeeze people, a lot of work out of people for the ultimate dollar that they're trying to create in value. And I'm not saying people don't do great work and give great value, but we at some point have to recognize, as we discussed in the discussion a couple of weeks ago about where is AI changing my job, that's going to happen really soon. One thing I didn't bring up that I'll just put out there is It's not going to be the prompt engineers that I told you a month or two ago is going to be one of the big titles. Now this person, Chris Penn, is saying it's going to be the people with ideas who can help move ideas into innovation, because ChatGPT cannot come up with ideas. So Ron, I will ask you to, let me just show you all, there's a ton of references, and I'll try to find the newsletter article I mentioned this morning. I'll put those links in the email so you'll be able to see them. And I will ask Ron, since we ran long, to go ahead and close the meeting. And thanks everybody for coming. Nada, I'm glad you could make it. You'll be part of the group that gets the link to the recording.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's interesting because we often think that these sessions are going to be 30, 35 minutes, and here we are 45 minutes in, and the conversation I'm sure could carry on even longer. So thanks very much for the contributions, and next time we see one another will be next month. I think it's the middle of the month.
Yes, October 16th is our next session. We'll have 2 in October. Yep. Thanks.
So
Ron.
thanks very much. See you then.
All right, everybody. See you.